Welcome to episode 6. Now, if you're like me and you've been following along with the whole Christ Revealed series, you have fallen in love with all of the interviews and the many travels that we've been able to take you on. On today's show, we will have an interview with Dr. Randall Price.
So Dr. Randall Price is this bigger-than-life character. He sort of reminds me of Indiana Jones, but he's a serious scientist. He's an archaeologist. He dug at Qumran, where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, and he was the lead archaeologist out there for a while. And we sit in what's referred to as a museum that literally is his private collection of biblical artifacts that he's dug up over the years. So if you want to see history come to life in a very compelling way, watch my interview with Dr. Randall Price. It's extraordinary. Dr. Price, thanks so much for taking time for us today.
Well, it's my pleasure.
So give us a bio sketch on you.
Well, I teach here at Liberty University, and I'm a research professor. I also am curator of our Limited Biblical Museum, which is the setting we're in today. My background is both in teaching biblical studies, Jewish studies, and as an archaeologist. For 10 years, I was director of excavations on the Qumran Plateau, which is the site of the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And now I'm involved in what's called Operation Scroll. We're looking through the caves in that area for more Dead Sea Scrolls that were hidden in jars and will help reveal more information about the Bible.
That's got to be exciting to be on the hunt for those things, I'd guess.
Well, it's exciting because it's a kind of unparalleled opportunity. Last 60 years, the politics in the region have prevented people getting to those caves. And I think generally people thought there was really nothing left to find because all of the excitement was in the 40s and 50s. And, you know, like talking about faith in general, many people think there's just nothing to find. It's all been done. And this is a world yet to explore, particularly in the Dead Sea and in other places as well.
Yeah, well, you talk about things to find. I mean, we're in the museum here, and we're surrounded by artifacts, and I have now come to find out this is your personal collection. Is there a sense of how many artifacts are here?
Well, there's about 2,800 artifacts here, collected over a period of 40 years. With the primary purpose of bringing the world of the Bible to the United States so people can see that and see for themselves that the faith that they have is based in history, based in a context of a real place.
Now, was your faith in place before you became an archaeologist and started going out there and collecting these artifacts?
It was. In fact, that's sort of what stimulated me to do this. I and my family moved to Israel. I studied at the Hebrew University. Part of that was studying archaeology. And I just became aware of how, in a sense, shallow my own faith was. I had a sort of a storybook faith. It was traditional. It had been taught to me all my life. And I never had challenged myself to really think, are these things true? And you just assume them. And now I'm in the living context of history where all these things actually took place. And I'm beginning to see, you know, if you could take the actual evidence and put it together with the documents that you already knew, how much more that would strengthen your faith.
Well, that's a very interesting characterization, storybook faith. And that is really kind of the chasm that you cross, because now, you know, when you're holding artifacts from the period, and so for people who don't have that experience personally, which is the majority of people, obviously maybe they understand the Old Testament, the New Testament, they've learned from the book, if you will. But when you're actually got your hands in the dirt and you're pulling the stuff away and it starts to corroborate what's in the book, what's the experience of that like, or what does it do to you personally?
I think that, we're more than just one sense. We have many senses. And we read, in fact, the New Testament, 1 John 1 tells us things which we have heard with our ears and seen with our eyes, things which our hands have handled concerning the word of truth.
Right.
For me, putting my hands in the dirt and pulling out an artifact that hadn't been touched in 2,000 years that could relate to a certain event that I read about in the Bible is, extremely moving, because now my already emotional, spiritual senses are combined with the real objective facts that are in the ground.
Right.
And I had to put that together, and the sense is that, this really happened. If it really happened, and it really happened to people here, and I'm like those people, then the faith they had is the kind of faith I should have. Not just, I'm living in a world, particularly when I'm down at the Dead Sea, lowest spot on earth, 2 inches of rainfall a year, up to 130 degrees temperature, nothing there, just barren. And people survived there, and they trusted God there. That's where Jesus was tested, Moses was tested, David was tested. You read about all these people living there. And for me, it made me say, when everything is stripped away, can I really survive just by faith alone? Can I really? And I think that's been translated to other parts of my life when I've lost things that I really depended on, and there was nothing left except a basic trust that God cared for me and He had spoken promises to me. Is that enough? And I think that real world experience helped me where I was, to make the leap, as it were, to my own experience.
So it's not only just validating intellectually, but on the spiritual level and the emotional level, it sort of creates a foundation or a confidence there that's maybe beyond what you would have had otherwise.
Oh yeah, well, confidence in one sense that my faith is not placed in objects that come from the ground or in archaeology or in science or anything. My faith is placed in the living God who has spoken, and I have trusted His word, and I've seen in my own experience that trust is valid. On the other hand, those types of evidences, which the Bible itself said I could expect to find. I mean, it was written in a context where this was normal. The people who lived in the Middle East, this is where the story unfolded. They saw these things. If I go there and I see those things, then all of a sudden I enter into that element of the experience. And so in a sense, there's a bit of confirmation. It simply reinforces, let's put it that way, that what I have believed is on a solid foundation. Yeah. So my faith is founded on facts. Right. I already had the faith, but now I have the facts that support it. And so in one sense, it holds it up a little firmer.
Yeah, so and this is where it starts to get, I think, interesting because you've spent a lifetime, collecting this evidence, right? So there's certainly a history that's written in the Bible. There's a lot of, scholarly work around the corroboration relative to that. And then there's the archaeological work, that also starts to validate. And a lot of this has come in, relatively speaking, recent times. And you start to see that there's the level of corroboration is pretty high. So when this evidence starts to stack up, from your scientific standpoint, and I also know that you have a PhD in philosophy from the University of Texas in Austin. So what conclusions have you drawn as far as relative to evidence and proof and how it ties into all of this?
Well, I think everyone comes with their presuppositions. While I believe in an objective faith, that is faith in an object outside of myself, I bring myself to that object. And it's sum total of my years being in a home with parents or not with parents, being subjected to good people, bad people, seeing maybe religious people who have gone astray or gone wrong or treated me wrong. I mean, all these things I bring to it. And so there is a reluctance many times to accept evidence, which is clearly there. The evidence is there. We interpret it differently based on those presuppositions.
Right.
I mean, everyone lives by faith. You get up in the morning because the sun has risen and you expect it to rise. You never question that. Right. You get in your car and you turn on the engine expecting it to start as it always does. Right. You have no idea about the mechanics of the engine or anything else. You just take that by faith. You may be driving to the doctor because you need an appointment, and he's going to look at you and write out a prescription for you. And basically, you can't even read that. You don't even ask him his credentials that are hanging on the wall. How many people have you successfully treated? You just take it all by faith and you do it. Then you go to a pharmacist and you take that piece of paper and you hand it to him because you can't even read it, and you expect him not to poison you to death, but to give you something that will actually help you. Right. We do that in our normal life all the time. That's simply faith. Yep. Because we're predisposed to accept these things as normal in our culture because it's part of what we've always accepted. Right. I think when we come to questions of faith. Who is Jesus? What is his claim? What does he ask of us? How does someone have a personal relationship with him, which is what he does ask of us? And, what's the evidence for that? We're going to bring those presuppositions. But many times our presuppositions are forced to change by that evidence. In other words, people may have a huge presupposition against the supernatural. Okay, I don't believe it, can't happen. But then they meet people who are walking miracles, in which things have happened, and that challenges those presuppositions. So they begin to move a little closer toward, I would think, more of an objective understanding of the evidence itself.
So, and it's very interesting, as you said, that people can have sort of these inflection points in their life where something moves them toward shifting one view of reality that they had, and now they move into a new one. With the work that you've done, well, let me ask this first. Why did you choose archaeology? I mean, why did that become the passion for you?
Well, I think for the very thing we're talking about, that in my case, I came as someone who already was trained in the Bible and history. And then I came into the living context, and I began to say, if other people could see this, what I've seen, because it emotionally changed me. A lot of my presuppositions, I had, back in my day, it was the flannel graph, and this was people may not understand what that's about, but it's putting little cutout figures on a board to tell a Bible story. And Jesus was dressed in pressed linen, and he walked on carpet grass, and I thought that's the way it was. And then I went to live in Jerusalem, and it wasn't anything like that, And the culture and the style, everything was so different from what I was used to in my American Western culture. And I realized now, as I come to the Bible, that's what I see. That's where they lived, and so to try to read the Bible through Western eyes, with a 20th or now 21st century perspective, is to miss it. I needed to go back into the world of the Bible to understand the message when it was given, how it was given, and the language it was given, and then understanding the truth there, export it to the 21st century so I could live it out. So that's why archaeology became important to me, because it puts those details and pieces together to help us explain the text more accurately.
So, so now what you're doing, since everybody can't go to Jerusalem, you're bringing artifacts back here so they can come visit, right here in the Western world. Have you witnessed any changes in people that were profound because they've come into contact with these artifacts, or with this direct contact with history?
Yeah, many times, which is why for the last 40 years I've done tours to the Bible lands, taking people to encounter this personally, and I see how it changes them. It's different for different people, but it's moving from what their comfort zones, their understanding of things, to seeing the way things really were. And then examining their own faith to say, is it a real faith? Is it the way it really should be? Do I have, as I mentioned earlier, a storybook faith, or do I have a real faith? Okay. And so that's what this experience can do. Not the same for everyone. Some people can just hold an artifact in their hand, and all of a sudden the connections made with 2,000-3,000 years of history to say, this came from the land of the Bible, from a place, where biblical events happened, and that's enough for me. Now, many people need much more, but that experience in itself is life-changing sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I might be asking that question somewhat selfishly because we're about to go to Israel. We're taking the whole film crew out there, and it's going to be my first trip there, so I'm really looking forward to it. In your experience, direct experience, what is the most profound or most important things that you feel like you've uncovered or discovered while you're in the Mideast?
Well, every archaeologist hates to hear that question because for them it's always the next thing they haven't found.
Right.
And we don't think of ourselves as Indiana Jones, on a quest to loot and find, but as a scientist, and that's what an archaeologist is, for me it's uncovering the past in such a way as to explain to the present what happened and why that's important, significance of things. Now, as I said, for 10 years I was director of excavations at Qumran, which is a settlement from 2,000 years ago. It existed during the time of Jesus, during the formation of the early church, a very pivotal point in history. And it was a settlement and a group of Jewish people who were unknown in history until we found the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so they write about very interesting things. They give us a commentary on certain verses of the Bible. One is about a Messianic banquet. In Isaiah chapter 25, verses 6 through 9, it talks about the final day when Messiah comes and he defeats the enemies of Israel, and the kind of a victory celebration is held, and it describes all of this in very interesting terms. When you come to the Dead Sea Scrolls, someone wrote a commentary on it. They actually wrote, but it wasn't just a commentary, it was instructions on how this should be observed. They assumed they were living at the end of days. The Roman Empire was there. They needed release from their enemies. So they expected this to happen in their day. The Messiah was coming. And so they write this about how when Messiah comes, he's going to sit down and the men of renown will come together and they will have this celebration, bread and wine and other things, and it's all explained. Well, in the 10 years of excavation at Qumran, we began to dig up the remains of a communal meal, which we believe relates to that very thing. We found a wine jar, sealed, never opened in over 2,000 years. We found these animal bone deposits, but they were a meal. They were cooked, and then they took the remains of the meal with all the vessels they cooked the meal in, all the vessels they served the meal in, and they went and buried them. And I'm thinking, what kind of people, in a place so desolate where pottery and things is not cheap, would take all of this and go bury it somewhere? Well, only people who had a very strong ritual concern. They believed that this was a sacred meal. It was for a very important purpose, that if you use those dishes again for a common meal or a common purpose, it would ruin it. So they could never use them again, so they took them and buried them. And by the way, it's the only place in Israel or in the world that we know of that this thing actually happened. But now I can connect a biblical passage, people who believe that passage actually expected to be part of that, and then the remains of their observation of those meals, and I'm the only person that really has that evidence still today. So for me, it's a very fascinating thing to combine biblical text, history, and personal experience, because I was involved in unearthing all of this.
Yeah, it's so. And what was the time frame to unearth this whole thing?
Well, 10 years.
Yeah,
basically.
wow.
We did to excavate the entire plateau where these things were hidden.
Wow. So that's a 10-year passion project.
Yes, for sure.
I guess it's a game of centimeters, right? As you're getting in there. Over time, to uncover all this stuff. So, well, let's talk about the team that's with you. Okay, so what are kind of, in a general sense, what are their backgrounds and orientations, and what's the spirit of this excavation like?
Well, every archaeological team has people with certain expertise, people who can, shall we say, be an area supervisor and control how a dig should happen, people who are involved in administration to make sure everything works well, and then people who can document those finds, and photographers and all of that. And then we have simply volunteers. And this is where, again, it gets exciting. I bring students. People come from all walks of life, join with me in this, and they make discoveries for the first time in their life. I'll tell you a story. There was a man in his late 60s. He came. We started like 4 a.m, and it was already getting hot by 5 or 6 o'clock. He hadn't had breakfast. He was using a pickaxe trying to dig, and he just said, "Look, I'm giving up. I can't do this anymore." He said, "I'm too old. I'm going to change my flight ticket and leave today." And I sat down on the edge of the bulk. This is the excavation square. And I just prayed. I said, Lord, I want to encourage this man, to do. He came all this way and did this. Can you do something? And it was amazing. The very next time he stuck his shovel in the ground, he pulled up this beautifully preserved oil lamp.
Wow.
And he said, "What's this?" And I said, "You found the find of this year for sure.
Wow.
Perfectly preserved. And there's only been one other like this that was found in a partial form in one of the caves of Qumran. So it's a very important thing. So he got his picture holding it. It ended up on a cover of a magazine.
Wow.
He stayed 2 more weeks. So just the passion and the experience of actually making a find just changed him from disappointment to, confidence.
Wow. And with these volunteers, is that what they do? They come and cycle in and out like every couple of weeks or a couple of months?
They come for the time that they can come,
Yeah.
and we train them, and they do a certain job. And then some make repeat trips over and over through the years. And I've actually seen people, as a result of doing this, go now back to school, become an archaeologist, get the passion. So some people, we say, get bit by the archaeological bug, and others don't. But you can see them as they're working. They just you can't even get them to stop for the day. They're so excited.
That's great. What's interesting, another thing that's probably I think important to talk about, is the context of being there, because it is culturally extremely different, right? The environment's very different, the seasons, the temperature, everything seems to be different there. And so if you're trying to understand the Bible, through reading it, and living where you live, let's say in the Western world, and then when you go and you exist there, there's a different contextual experience you have that can deepen the understanding. So talk a little bit more about that.
Well, let me say first, we have sometimes the feeling that the Bible's a grab bag. It's whatever I want it to mean. It can mean anything I want. And so it doesn't really matter who it was written to or when it was written or where it was written. I'm applying it to my experience. Well, there's a devotional sense of application which is correct with that. But we can't get there until we understand that God chose a place, and he chose a time. In the Bible, it tells us, in the fullness of time, or at the right time, God sent his Son to be born of a woman and be born under the law, when that was in effect. It says he came to his own people. And so he was born as a Jew, because God had chosen Abraham and his descendants, the Jewish people, to be the bearers of his revelation and to extend that to the world. So if you are going to get that message, you're going to have to go to them. And then, so he came as part of a whole line of promises made to them, that they could expect one who would come, one who would be the seed of Abraham, one would be the line of David, one who would be, ultimately born in Bethlehem. All these promises were made, and he came to fulfill those. And so when we go to approach the Bible, we have to approach it on its own terms, not our terms. So I have to go back to that place. I have to go to that context, either by getting books to help me understand that, watching films like yours to help understand that, or to actually go there myself. And then we're in the place where we can put it all together and say, okay, now I can see things through the eyes of those who wrote the Bible, who lived the Bible. And once I understand it as they understood it, then I can take the next step. How should I understand it for myself?
Yeah. With all your experience and talking about evidence as it keeps mounting up over time, you've got a handbook on biblical archaeology. Can you tell us about that and what's it describe?
Well, in this particular case, I'm walking through the Bible, picking out verses that need explanation from the archaeological world. Again, trying to put the text back into a context so we can understand it better. And that's where we have not only places, but we also have artifacts that illustrate those places. Some are very key because they will mention the names of people in the Bible, or they or relate to the historical figures in the Bible. For instance, when we talk about Jesus, the historical Jesus, he had a Roman trial, and so you have the Roman governor Pontius Pilate. We have inscriptions of Pontius Pilate that he left for us. We have the Jewish trial of Jesus, Joseph Caiaphas, and we have the ossuary or bone box of Caiaphas with his name on it. These are people related to Jesus personally.
Let's dig into that for a second. So in the bone box, and this is where maybe the debate comes in. from your point of view, you feel that it's very validating, the discovery of this bone box, but others might say, well, they're not convinced yet. So talk about both sides of that so we can see how these things are discussed.
I talk more in terms of plausibility than proof, because you'll never be able to prove things absolutely. I mean, there's some cases where there's just no doubt. We have the name of the place you're digging there. It says it. What else could it be? With the Caiaphas issue, here we have a family tomb. We have obviously a wealthy family. There were 12 ossuaries or bone boxes where they put the bones of the people a year after their death in these boxes to make room for barrels in the regular niches. And one of those boxes is very ornate. It's carved with palmettes and rosettas and all kind of things that were very typical of someone of rank. In the box, there is the bones from carbon dating. We know someone about 60 years of age. And we know that written on the box, inscribed on it, is the name Joseph Caiaphas. There's two inscriptions of that, spelled somewhat differently. And so we know from the New Testament there was a man named Caiaphas who was the high priest at the time of Jesus. We know that from Josephus Flavius, a first century Jewish historian, there was he writes about a man named Joseph Caiaphas, and so this ossuary has both of those. So even though there's not a title that says high priest, and even though we don't have clear, direct evidence, there's nothing that, how could you in a case like this? But from the ancient world that we know, we have a lot of names, we have a lot of descriptions. There is no other Caiaphas that we can match to this. It's the only one we know. He was a wealthy man. He was a man of rank. He was an older man. All of this fits the picture. So what evidence am I willing, to take to validate something in my mind? Well, I already come with the presupposition that we have an historical character named Caiaphas, and that he was there presiding over the Jewish trial of Jesus. He actually organized the plot against Jesus, we read. And by the way, ossuaries, these bone boxes, have a very narrow lifespan. I mean, they started maybe about 100 years before the time of Jesus and end, just shortly after that. So very, very short period of time. So we have something from the right time. We have someone with the right name. We have someone with the right, conditions in terms of the nature of this tomb. Why would I not then at least be plausible that this is the Joseph Caiaphas that was mentioned in the New Testament? Again, your presuppositions are brought to that, but I'm more predisposed to accept it than to reject it.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a high level of likelihood here, right? So as compared to saying there's a remote possibility, I mean, this seems very plausible.
But again, why would someone not accept that evidence? Well, that would lead them to the historical Jesus and ultimately to the claims of that historical Jesus upon their own life, which might be very uncomfortable, not willing to want to go there or concede that or to be examined, in terms of their own faith. And so they would want as much as possible to try to make that evidence less than it could be in their case.
So that's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because they'd say, they're looking for reasons to deny it or to say that to invalidate. And I think if somebody were to come at it objectively, you could say, could you say this is 100% certain? No. Is it a very high degree of likelihood? I mean, there's so many pieces that would have to add up. The probability of it not being him, is very low, seemingly.
And I don't think people consciously come out to refute something. I mean, there are some where their career is built on a certain premise that they have to attack a contrary premise in order to retain, their standing, everything that they know and everything that they are. And it is true. I mean, when we talk about Jesus, particularly Jesus, I mean, you can talk about Buddha, Confucius, anybody you want to in history, and it does not seem to have the same effect on people as Jesus does. Because he's the only one that said, if you believe in me, you have eternal life. If you trust me, you take my word. No one else made those kind of claims. No one else claimed to rise from the dead. No one else claims, to be able to take you to heaven simply for believing in him and what he did on your behalf. And so there's, I think, in a certain level, I may not perceive for most people, there's a threat, and it's a challenge. So they are going to be more diligent about trying to unravel this than try to simply accept it. Right. And you'll see this. You'll see people who have faith. Most people come to me and say, well, I don't need that. I don't need to find that. I don't need to find anything. I'm fine. I just believe what I was told. And other people say, well, that's gullible, and you are someone who really can't be serious. But they are, because their faith does not require that amount of evidence in order to be confirmed.
Well, what's interesting is you had faith before you started in your career, but still got excited about and have eminently succeeded in a career that keeps building evidence. And it's not like you had maybe the need of it, but I guess somehow it still was stimulating to you.
Well, I mean, faith grows. Yeah. There was a time when I didn't have faith. I didn't believe. I started down a more scientific path. I was, there were a lot of things I could not explain that I didn't know if I wanted to call them supernatural, but they were intriguing. But the Bible wasn't part of that. And when it became part of that, as I had someone challenge me to consider its claims and to believe, it took a while, but eventually I found that the Bible was trustworthy. And if the Bible is trustworthy, its message was trustworthy, and therefore I could trust the one who gave that word, which was Jesus himself. That moved me into a whole different level in which there was a relationship. There are people, I remember the whole story about Albert Einstein's wife. They said, do you understand, Albert's theory of, relativity and all that? She said, no, I don't. She said, but I know Albert. He can be trusted. Now, see, I don't know everything that there could be. I'll never have enough knowledge in all these various fields to be able to have, to say I know absolutely for sure. But I've come to know the one who I believe is life and who has spoken, and I think his word is true. And I've found that he can be trusted. So I don't have I come with that trusting factor when I come to his word. Now, there's a lot to understand, and I'm seeking to understand it. And I try to, that's how my faith grows, as it starts very small, and experiences, especially in trusting God and seeing him come through for me, testing me, and knowing that it actually is a test, and if I react correctly, I kind of grow even more. And then all the evidences and things that I have. Evidence not just from archaeology, but from the general sciences and from other parts of life, give me, I guess, a firmer foundation than what I had. The foundation was enough to support me. It's secure. But it just gets more solid, and I feel that sense that, these things are true. There was a philosopher named Francis Schaeffer. He talked about true truth. So in that sense, it's true, but it's true for me. And it's objectively true, but it's also subjectively true in this case.
So it's a faulty premise to think that science and faith are mutually exclusive things.
Well, let's take. Science is very much a changing discipline. You go back even 5 years in some science, and it's old hat. We know things are very different now. The way people operated in the medieval period is barbaric, and the people, maybe 20 years from now will think things we do are barbaric. And so our understanding of astronomy, we just don't know. Recently we had an eclipse of the sun here. And you think, well, the sun is so big and the moon is so small, how in the world does it cover the whole sun? Well, the sun is 400 times larger than the earth, but the earth is 400 times closer, the moon is 400 times closer to the earth than the sun is. And that proportion works just right, to make a solar eclipse. That's not observable everywhere in the universe, but it is here.
Right.
And for me, someone designed that. That's not a coincidence. It's not an accident. It wouldn't work if it wasn't just right.
Right.
And so these kind of evidences that come all the time in the world we live in, from the sciences, continue to impress me that my faith is genuine.
So an area that you also have particular expertise in is the Old Testament, or maybe the linkages from the Old Testament into the New Testament.
Right.
Can you talk about that area of your expertise?
Well, the Old Testament, or we call it the First Testament, or simply, in Jewish terms, the Tanakh, the Torah, the Nevi'im, the Ketuvim, 3 parts of the Bible, the law, the prophets, the writings. This is the revelation that God gave through time to the Jewish people to then disseminate to the world. In Genesis 12:3, Abraham is told, I will bless those who bless you, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. So people often wonder, wasn't it odd of God to choose the Jews? I mean, why them? Well, it wasn't all about them. They were simply servants, to be used to bring the message to the rest. They're a means of blessing to the world. And so that message that was given has an end game, that is to bless, to bring God's salvation and his peace on earth, and all the things people want are wrapped up in that package. So God has a plan. He reveals that plan down through time. It starts with this First Testament, the Old Testament, all the way, for me, back to the original man and woman in a garden. As it says in Genesis 3:15, there that the seed of the woman will be in conflict with the seed of the serpent who deceived her, and ultimately, while the serpent will bruise his heel, he will crush his head. We see that expanded in the Bible, but that's a very initial promise of the fact that a woman will have a child. That child will be the one who saves them from the curse, from the evil one. Ultimately, he will himself be wounded in some way, and I think it's a fatal wound. When a snake bites you, you pretty much you're on the way out.
Right.
But of course, he must recover from that in order to ultimately crush that one and have the victory. So we have already from the very beginning of the Bible a kind of a picture of what God wants to do. We see the outline, and then he starts to fill that in. Abraham is chosen and says, now of your seed, there's going to be one. So it's a seed of a woman, now it's a seed of Abraham, who is the father of the Jewish people. So it's going to be someone Jewish. And then it tells us that there's a tribe of Judah, and that there's going to be a king that comes from the tribe of Judah. And then it says from the tribe of Judah, there's a family called the house of David. And now that seed is going to come from that line as well, and will be there forever. And then you get all these pictures of, this is one who we'll call him a branch that branches out, a righteous branch. Talks about him as a king, talks about him as a conqueror, talks about him as one who's going to ultimately bring the hope of Israel together. And then it talks about a place where he'll be born, Bethlehem, a house of bread, so that this one who, a place of feeding, place of sustenance, and all this came together, of course, as we move through history to Jesus of Nazareth, who was born in Bethlehem, was born of the lineage of Abraham, born of the tribe of Judah, born of the house of David, and in fact then goes on to proclaim himself the King of the Jews. When he died, that was the words written by his enemy, the one who punished him, written on the placard above his cross, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And of course, the story doesn't end there. We believe it goes on with the resurrection 3 days later, and then the promise that I will come again, and all these things that he laid out in the Old Testament he would do. He would establish a kingdom, that he would rule over Israel and the nations. He would bring peace on earth. War would end. All kind of glorious things would happen, and that's what we wait for. So for me, if I connect these dots, going down this, shall we say, highway of promise, that if you take this by faith, and then you say, what happened? Take it by faith. Oh, this happened. And now we look back on these things, all of having happened in one person, one time. And, you say now, if it happened literally, and it happened as precisely as it did then, can I not then trust what he said will yet happen? And we actually have a passage of the Bible that talks about that. It says, you have your faith made more sure because of the fulfillment of these messianic promises. So now I look forward to the coming of the Messiah again to fulfill the rest of what he said he would do.
So now that, and obviously you have such a great grasp on this, when you're in Israel or in Jerusalem, and you are interacting with people of other faiths, what's that dynamic like? Because I'm sure you speak to other people who are principals in their faith, and that you have these interactions as you're doing your work. What's that like?
Well, I would say there is a common core. For those who respect the Bible, we have certain basic principles, basic beliefs that we share. But again, those presuppositions come in. I happen to have a Jewish background, but for Jewish people, what you find is that now they have the experience of persecution and pogrom and the Holocaust and all of these things, much of it in the name of Jesus, much of brought about by what they called the church. The result is the last thing they want to hear or deal with is Jesus. To them, many Orthodox Jews, it's still a swear word. They'll never say Jesus, say Yeshu, which just means may his name be accursed. And his proper name is Yeshua, and built off the verb Yeshua, which means to save. So in the New Testament it says, you shall call his name Jesus, for you'll save his people from their sins. But again, all that is, shall we say, obscured by the emotional, historical experience of persecution and suffering under the cross, under the name of Jesus, all these things that have happened. So there's a point at which we share certain things, but there's a point at which you just can't go. And only, as someone has looked at the evidence themselves and begin to honestly look at it, despite all this emotional historical baggage, can they move beyond that? And of course, there are thousands of people have. In Israel, there are congregations of Jewish people, Israelis, who believe in Jesus, even though it's counterculture, and they're considered renegades and even, blamed for the genocide of their own people, because the typical Jewish view is if you believe in Jesus, you're no longer Jewish.
Right.
As though somehow, magic transformation happened and you change somehow. You can be an atheist and be a Jew, but you can't be a Christian and be a Jew. So, and it's again tied to this this whole history that's there. But those people who step back objectively and are able to look at it have been able to embrace a Jesus who their own culture and people reject. And so with them, of course, I share a different affinity because we both had our own journeys to Jesus and understand what that's about.
Some of the more stimulating artifacts that you might have relate to coins. You have silver coins back there that would have been the same types of coins that Judas would have received.
Yeah, I have basically every coin of biblical significance. I have a coin that has probably the Star of Bethlehem on it. I have coins of Augustus Caesar, who was the emperor when Jesus was born. I have coins that Jesus would have used. He referred to the pruta of Alexander Jannaeus, which they call the widow's mite, the small coins. The denarius, all these things are mentioned in the Bible, particularly ones that are related to Jesus' ministry and life. The coin used for paying taxes, the several shekel, the Tyrian shekel, the half shekel, which was the one was paid Judas Iscariot as the money paid to someone who, for the value of a slave, is what it was. And So that's a silver coin. Even have coins related to many things related to Jewish history. One of Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who proclaimed himself divine. It's written on the coin like that. Antiochus Epiphanes, God manifest. And this is behind the one who defiled the temple. And the Jews rose up, a family of the Maccabees, and defeated him, rededicated the temple. The word for rededication is Hanukkah. So this is the whole event of that. Have coins minted by Titus and Vespasian, the father and son who destroyed the second temple after the time of Jesus, and minted coins that have Judea capta on it, Jews captive, and show them. So I mean, in coins we have a whole history of these events, and that's exciting in itself because they have often a date and time. I have a coin. Many of them, in fact, minted by Pontius Pilate, and one's dated the very year of the crucifixion.
Wow!
So here's a coin by the guy who condemned Jesus to the cross with the very date of the date it happened. So those things are stimulating.
I to say the least. And you also have nails, I think, right?
We have many of the Roman crucifixion nails from the first century. I have one of the barbs from the cat of nine tails they used to scourge a victim, such as Jesus was scourged with. Roman dice. The Bible tells us that the Roman officers gambled for his seamless garment. They didn't want to tear it apart, so they had those kind of dice. The kind of spear that pierced his side. I have that exact spear. Not that spear, but one like it. It's called the Spear of Destiny. It has a whole history, but that's not the one I have, but I have one like it. And a number of other things like that related to these events, because they still exist. People sometimes don't realize that so much from the ancient world is still there. It can be unearthed, and therefore the present can connect with the past in very exciting ways.
And again, these are all pieces of things that are written about in the Bible. But then they're they exist in material fact, and the reference, like you say, even things like you're talking about the barbs, it's like, wow, this is written about, and here they are.
Yeah, but again, think about it. It means an average person looking at it says, so what? It's just a piece of metal. And if you reduce it to that level, that is all it is. But now you bring the document, which we believe is a document given by God, which explains for us the one God himself coming into time to take our form, to pay for our sins, to do an act, and that it was history. And then now these things are related to that. It becomes something far more exciting, where some people, as a matter of faith, even would consider it a relic, and venerate it. I wouldn't, but I mean, their faith and emotions drive them to see that as something of that importance. So again, it's what you bring to it when you come.
And you have a PhD in Near East Studies from the University of Texas, a secular university, and you now teach at a Christian university. And there's, what do you feel like the trends are for university students in general, especially those who maybe were born in Christian families, but maybe have the university experience starts to alter their view? What are you observing?
It's very different in every generation. I mean, we had, the Generation X. Well, I'm the baby boomers, but the Generation X, and then you had the millennials, and Generation Y is with us now, and then Generation Z is coming up now. I mean, this is the first year in which we have people come into the university who are not born in the 20th century, at all. So something like 9/11 for many kids is going to be ancient history. I mean, something they never experienced or know about. But now we also come from a world that is biblically literate. Public schools do not teach that. They even purposely try to distance themselves from that. They come with a worldview that is formed from your culture, primarily, mainly from video games and television or whatever, movies, wherever you get, peers, and it's pretty mixed up. And we here have a biblical worldview. And one of the first courses every student takes is biblical worldview, to help them understand the various worldviews that exist out there, how this one differs, and the significance it brings, to orient yourself into a relationship with the living God who made all these things. Because if you're part of that creation, you're really not right until you're rightly related to the one who made it and sustains it. And then to think you could actually know that one personally and be guided by him is an amazing thing. And so then you begin to look at all of your sciences and subjects and arts and everything through the lens of that biblical worldview. And now, being a law enforcement officer is important because God made you to serve and defend and protect, or the arts because God is a designer and these creative things. You feel energized by knowing that you have the God who made all things has given you the gifts and skills to do this. And music and all these things. And in my area, just to dig deeper into the understanding of the background of this through archaeology and sciences, here we try not to steal faith, but to instill faith.
Right.
And I think the statistics are something like more than 80% of kids who are raised even in a homeschool, Christian school, good church, lose their faith when they come to college. Because it's never been their faith. It's been the family's faith, the parents' faith, the church's faith. They've never themselves come to the place where they've had to grapple with these issues, come to a firm decision for themselves. Tradition won't do it. You got to have truth. And so they come to a college, and if you don't give them that, in fact, if you hide that or, shall we say, rail against that, as many universities do, feeling like we got to keep church and state and everything separate, and, worst thing on earth is to be religious. Well, in a sense, I think religious is a problem. I'd rather have a relationship than be a religious person. But
what is that distinction?
Well, a religion is my attempt to try to please God, to find out who He is, and in some way find out what He wants, and to hopefully do something that'll help me in a relationship with that one. A relationship is where God took the first step, and He came to me. He revealed Himself, and He said, I love you, and I responded to that love and to that invitation, and as a result, a relationship is formed. And I find there's really nothing I can do to please Him or to gain His approval. That's all done. He did that.
Right.
And so I live in a relationship that is already secure and confident. I simply grow in that relationship.
That's
and
a great
faith.
distinction. I've not heard anybody make that distinction, but I think it's a very important one.
But, as we have about 15,000 students here at Liberty, as many come with no faith at all. And the parents want them to come here because it was a safe environment, conservative environment, whatever it might be. And they're challenged concerning faith. Some may never believe, some struggle to believe, but many do believe. And we have a lot of students who come to faith in their first, second years. And then it just is a life-changing thing. Now, looking at all of life and the choices ahead of them from a biblical worldview, it's not, where can I make the most money? Or, what job is, the job of the future? Or, what's going to get me? It's not me anymore.
Right.
It's what does God want from my life? And God gives His best to those who leave the choice with Him. Right. And they've learned to do that. And so we have many students who, whether they're in our medical school, in our law school, whatever they see themselves as servants, and they go into that profession to try to help, to serve, to better others rather than themselves. And in the process, of course, they help themselves too.
Sure.
But that's what it's about.
That's fascinating journey you just took us on. And, so with maybe just a little final word, so what do you see for the future Christianity?
Christianity has a lot of challenges, basically from within. The problem of a cultural shift in which very few things are believable. We have people who want to believe. We have people who need to believe. but they don't know what to believe. And they have to find people who are believable. And unfortunately, we were running churches like a business rather than demonstrating real love and concern and sacrifice for others, and not as believable as it used to be. And people are looking for that. They're fleeing from the traditional churches because they're not finding that there.
Right.
And I think that we have to change our image, our brand, in one sense, to be what we were called to be. As we do that, as we conform more to Christ and who He is, and we reach out. I mean, it's not about being comfortable making it our own. No, it really is about we're no longer our own. We've been bought with a price, and we're to glorify God with our bodies and all that we are. When you start making those kind of choices, that's contagious.
Yeah.
People see that and say, I don't know, nothing else has worked for me. I'm frustrated. I've got everything, but I don't have that. How do you get that? And so, let's put it this way: people who are genuine, who are believable, then they can lead someone to real faith.
Yeah. Well, I think it's been fascinating to have this conversation with you. I appreciate you taking the time because I know how busy you are. And I think what you shared is going to enlighten a lot of people.
Good. Thank you.